Hi, it's Ronnie the Dungeon Daddy, and I'm going to report on our playtest of the Commander and Guardian for Pathfinder 2e. First, I need to address this thumbnail. I actually mean what I say when I say victim class. It's not only hyperbole. I will say more later, but the player of one of the two Guardians in our playtest did RP Face McShooty from Borderlands fame.
I am going to activate one of the other feats I got, which is covering stance. Shoot me in the face!
And I think that's a logical way to roleplay a class, one of whose main features is to say, from 30 feet or maybe even 120 feet away, hit me! You can hit me! I'm easier to hit and you can hit me really hard. And also your strategic goal is to redirect hits and damage to you instead of to your allies who are more threatening offensively than you are. I focus on it because I think it is one of the underlying issues with the Guardian playtest, and I'll give more detailed and nuanced feedback later. But yes, we have two classes for the Battlecry book that comes out probably in 2025, the Commander and Guardian. And it's the Guardian that has gotten much more negative feedback from the community. I've seen threads on the subreddit saying that it is too weak or that it does not sufficiently fulfill its class fantasy of being a tank. And there has been pushback against the pushback, people wanting to maintain a positive attitude. And to be clear, I completely agree with much of what they say. Paizo has a very good track record responding to feedback to playtests. And historically, they often release playtest classes that are weaker than the final version. It's actually the last couple of years where they have deviated from their historical pattern. Also, we don't know whether the overall power of the class is a big priority for them. There are other things you want to playtest in the playtest, and overall power can be tweaked. Historically, we've pretty much always seen the final version of a Pathfinder 2e class hew closer to the expected power level of a class than the playtest version. But this is also a playtest, and our job as players is to give criticism and feedback and run the playtest as written. I delayed doing a video covering the Guardian playtest because I wanted to do a playtest first and have actual play experience because my impressions were initially negative and I thought it would be better to have actual experience with the class, building one and seeing it in play before saying anything negative. 20 missed by one because every plus one miss! All right,
Can I donate a hero point?
No! Our playtest group generally felt negatively about the Guardian while making characters for this party, and generally had their initial thoughts confirmed by the playtest. And in the comments to our playtest live stream, naturally there are people pushing back against this negative take. One of the commenters went so far as to say that we should have read into the key defensive reaction of the Guardian that it resisted all damage from a triggering attack, instead of just the triggering damage. Our playtesters thought that the class features for the Guardian were too weak, and this commenter said, why did we not take some feats that strengthened those class features? And to that I'm thinking, well, that illustrates the problem. They also took issue with one of our Guardian players taking what the community generally agrees is an overpowered feat in the playtest, hampering sweeps, which locks down enemy movement of people around, saying it is broken and that we don't even need to playtest that really. And to that I'd say, well, hampering enemy movement is a clear design goal of the designers, and we need to see this feat in action and see what it does and see what could be done to ameliorate it if it is overpowered. And it's not limited to this one commenter. I think there's an overall defensiveness among some members of the community about criticizing this draft class that is unwarranted. The people at Paizo are big boys and girls. They can take criticism. It's through criticism that they're able to improve and put out a good product. Paizo's willingness to listen to criticism ever since it did its first playtest of Pathfinder 1st Edition has been what has distinguished it, and we should be doing our part. And now I want to play a clip from my friend Offbeat Outlaw, who had some pointed words for people who were saying during the playtest for the next edition of D&D that if we see problems in the playtest documents that we should just house rule them.
And now, to all of you motherfuckers who are about to say homebrew it, I'm going to slap you across the jaw with a rusty spoon. This is playtest content. The point of it is to test it and see if we like it. If we don't like it, we tell Wizards of the Coast so they can change it. That's the point. If you are going to go to the comments and say just homebrew it, I am going to slap the shit out of you. That is the dumbest way to interact with playtest content ever. If you are that butthurt about somebody criticizing Wizards of the Coast when they are actively asking to be criticized because they want to make a product that people will buy, you do not have the critical brain function required to watch YouTube videos or interact in a public space.
All right, given that, I want to also apologize in advance for the sheer length of this video. I wanted to incorporate as much as I reasonably could all of the very good feedback that came from the playtesters, the live chat, and the community that I have heard preparing for this video. All right, so you know who I am. I'm Ronald the Rules Lawyer. I'm a lawyer who runs tabletop role-playing games. My preferred system is Pathfinder 2nd Edition. For 7 years, I ran an after-school middle school class for role-playing games. And support my Patreon if you haven't already. It allows me to continue this channel. I don't make money as an attorney. For more info on why, look at the video whose thumbnail is on the screen. Supporting my Patreon gives you ad-free early access to most of my videos and exclusive content. All right, so without further ado, let's talk about the Guardian class. Now, a disclaimer. I will be proposing a large number of specific changes to the class, not because I think they all should be implemented, because it would be too powerful, and I'm not even saying that any particular one is a strict improvement to the design. I raise them to illustrate specific points. In the end, it has to be a cohesive whole and achieve a desired overall power level. There will need to be trade-offs, and I don't envy the responsibility that the designers have here. Our goal here is to point out the issues that came up during our playtest and enrich the overall discussion around this class. You'll also see that my critiques here focus on the base level 1 class features, the class chassis. Clearly because those are the most important, defining, and probably most powerful parts of the class that other classes shouldn't be able to take easily via an archetype. A number of the issues I raise with these class features are ameliorated by feats, and I commend the designers for thinking of these issues by putting them into feats. However, I think the fact that they require feats, including from that commenter who said you got to take these feats to make the class features better, illustrates an issue with the base features. Feats should not feel like taxes. So now to elaborate on my take on the Guardian being a victim class. It is not simply hyperbole. I think that is how the designers earnestly want to achieve the goal of a tank. There are many different definitions out there of what a tank is in one of these games, and I think I boiled it down to its essentials, I say that it includes drawing attention from your enemies, making them waste actions on you, or time, and you obviously want to be better able to withstand that extra attention you're getting. Now, there's more than one way to get people to pay attention to you. And I did a whole retrospective on D&D 4th edition where the fighter class was very sticky. It was hard to walk away from them and gave you penalties to make any attack that did not include the fighter. In Pathfinder 2e, we can point to the champion class, who is defined mostly by their champion's reaction. When a nearby ally is struck by a nearby enemy, the champion can resist some of that damage to the ally and punish the enemy in some way, basically punishing the enemy for attacking anyone besides you and making them want to target you instead next time. Also, the champion has the Lay on Hands focus spell, healing an ally and increasing that ally's defenses. That also tends to make the champion a higher priority in attacking first. The way the Guardian is designed, earnestly designed, is to be the one to get hit. Either to direct damage from allies to yourself through your Intercept Strike reaction, or to spend an action, Taunt, to make yourself a more enticing target, to make it more likely that they will hit you and that they will critically hit you. Your goal as a Guardian is to have a very punchable face, and to get your face punched. And the overall goal here, and what you're better at doing than any other class, is damage dispersal. In general, in games like this, D&D and Pathfinder, you want to focus fire on one enemy in order to knock them out and lessen the other side's action economy. As the Guardian, they have a harder time doing that because you can redirect all that damage to yourself. Unlike the champion's reaction, you get to negate all of the damage to 0 that would be inflicted on your ally. Done appropriately, in theory, you can make sure that everyone on your side stays on their feet. Now, for that other part of tanking, being able to withstand that attention, you have better defenses than other classes. You have Guardian Armor at level 1. You get the armor specialization effect of your armor, something no other class gets this early. And your proficiency with defense increases more quickly than any other class, even the champion. You reach every better level of proficiency 2 levels earlier than the champion does. But unlike the champion, your improvement is confined to medium and heavy armor only. This does mean, however, that for 14 of the 20 levels, your AC is about equal to that of the champion. And it's effectively lower than the champion when you use your Taunt ability. The other way in which it's fair to call you the victim class is that you're less effective offensively than every other martial class. So many classes, including those that you wouldn't think are martials, like the Investigator, the Thaumaturge, all of their attack proficiencies with weapons increase at the same level. At 5th level, they become expert. At 13th level, they become masters. Your accuracy improves more slowly and is comparable to the Cleric War Priest. This is part of the package. If someone is going to get knocked out in your party, it's better you than them because you pose less of an offensive threat. And I'm going to point out that this is a challenging design territory, especially given Pathfinder 2e combat. In these games, martial characters generally protect squishy characters, usually casters, in the back line. And in games like this, that usually means that you have opportunity attacks, a free attack that you can make against a foe who leaves your threatened area, or moves within your threatened area. This gives them incentive to have to deal with you first before your squishy ally. The other way martials in Pathfinder 2e draw attention is the fact that they usually do a lot more damage than their counterparts. Fighters have their greater accuracy, barbarians have their rage damage, rogues have their sneak attack damage, and so on. So here's a simple example where we had this moment in our fight against the Spirit of Wrestling where the Guardian was in trouble. It was grappled by the Spirit of Wrestling, and the fighter moved into a flanking position.
I'm going to stride over.
So we're using offense to tank and protect the Guardian. In fact, the fighter landed 1 critical hit and 1 hit.
Then this will just be a regular attack.
Damage.
Fighter. Oh, shit.
Also, all the fighter crit effects trigger here.
Come on, crit!
Due to the fighter accuracy.
Every fighter
always matters.
And the ghost's health bar went down into the red. This forces the Spirit of Wrestling to want to pay attention more on the fighter than against the Guardian who's on the ground and poses much less of an immediate threat. It's like in the movies when 2 people are pointing a gun at each other, you're on the side of one of them, and you point a gun at your friend's enemy. You protect your ally with the threat of retaliation.
Looks like we got a Mexican standoff.
Guess again. We've got a sniper trained on your position.
Nice try. But I've had an unmanned drone on that sniper's ass this whole time.
You mean the unmanned drone our hacker just took over?
Now, Paizo is trying to design a class that focuses on defense and lessens its offense. And you can see the problem here. If you are standing there saying, I'm really hard to hit, the enemy is actually more likely to ignore you, which is not the goal of a tank. And Pathfinder 2e, for better or for worse, does not have an aggro mechanic like you see in MMOs where you compel an enemy to attack you or move towards you. There are other tabletop role-playing games that do that, such as D&D 4e. This was highlighted in my video, retrospective on the 4e fighter. The come and get it level 7 power draws enemies within 2 squares of you towards you and lets you attack all of them and mark them naturally when they do. This kind of thing is something that Paizo has generally avoided because of how it breaks verisimilitude. What if such a power were used against party members, for example? It would be hard to explain outside of magic or something in the fiction that makes you have a really punchable face. Here is a controversial feat from 1st edition Pathfinder called Antagonize. This is actually the eroded version. The original version, if you succeeded at an intimidation check against a foe, they had to run towards you and make a melee attack, even if it was a spellcaster 200 feet away. In this version of the spell, they had to attack you in some way, but they had no choice in the matter. What Pathfinder 2e does with its tanks, firstly with the current champion class, is create a mechanical incentive to attack you, short of compulsion. And so for the champion, their champion's reaction punishes you for hitting their ally, making you not want to hit their allies next time. And the champion can also heal and increase the defenses of that ally with Lay on Hands. Here, the Guardian wants to jump in front of the damage and take the damage instead with Intercept Strike. And also with Taunt, wants to entice the enemy to attack you with the greater chance of hitting and critting you than they would with your ally. And I've got to say in advance, I'll be comparing a lot to the champion throughout this video because that is our established final, up to this point, version of a class that is a tank. It's going to get revised in the remaster. But for obvious reasons, it's useful for comparison. And it's why we included a champion in the playtest, and also why in the second fight, we had the party split into two, where on the eastern side, a relatively squishy character, the Bard, with both a Guardian and a champion on that side. Okay, so now let's deal with Taunt. This is their action to try to draw attention from a foe. You spend an action on a foe within 30 feet, and they must do a will saving throw to avoid being affected. And they're affected even on a success. They get a +2 circumstance bonus on attack rolls, and effects against you that have DCs also have a +2 bonus. Meanwhile, there's a -1 circumstance penalty when you try to do anything against any of the Guardian's allies that does not include the Guardian. The worst results increase that penalty. First thing I want to say is that this does seem to have an apparent impact against a high threat boss who's higher level than the party. If you can land this on a boss, they will have a -1 or a worse penalty in attacking all of your allies. And this, of course, is a system where every +1 and -1 matters. However, it can resist, and being a higher level foe, it probably will succeed on its save, so you're probably not going to give a penalty more than -1. And it also makes yourself more vulnerable to that boss, and so you're not going to want to stick around, which leads to the next point, which is Taunt, in our playtest, was used more by the Guardians when the Guardian was away from the enemy. And there's a couple of reasons for that. First, obviously, you're more protected if you are farther away from the foe, since movement costs actions in Pathfinder. And also, for that same reason, if you are some distance away from your allies where that foe is, that foe not only has to waste actions going to you, it is now farther away from your allies. It's less of a threat to your allies. And your wanting to be away from the enemy when you taunt is a bit at odds with the Guardian's other class features. Its heavy armor, its other features, strength being its key attribute, suggests that you are in the thick of things, in the front lines. We also saw in the third fight that it can be used to draw in a flying foe. Flying foes against a grounded enemy have an advantage. They can go in, make an attack, and fly away. And Taunt is one tool to lure a flying foe right where you want them. And we saw it play out in the third fight against a boss dragon when the long-distance Guardian, which had the feat long-distance taunt, a range of 120 feet, taunted the dragon, which was flying in and out and was 80 feet away, and it failed its saving throw. So it later would fly in and attack the Guardian with Draconic Frenzy, and the party was then able to grapple it, pin it down, and kill it. However, we agreed after the fight that it was a tactical mistake by the dragon, and this was a dragon. Many dragons are cunning and have a high intelligence. Probably better to stay at a distance, use its flight advantage, and kill the party with breath weapon attacks. And there was a fair argument that the dragon should have gone after the fighter, who had the fly spell cast on her, and was more of a threat overall in the fight. This, even though the dragon would have needed to roll 2 higher to hit the fighter. And so if your GM is playing monsters according to their intelligence, Taunt is probably more effective against mindless and low intelligence foes. And here we also see why some systems make aggro abilities compulsory in order to get around this fact. Intelligent foes don't want to do something that is detrimental to them, and Taunt leaves them a choice. But let's zero in on the controversial +2 to attack the Guardian when the Guardian taunts something. Here we bring up the fact that the Guardian, yes, does have better defenses than nearly all other character classes. But how effective are you in protecting you from the greater danger you expose yourself to when you taunt? The argument is that you have a higher armor class. But is that true? Actually, it's not true until you get to level 5, when you become an expert in your medium and heavy armor defense. So for the first 4 levels, which are probably the most important levels, that's when most people play the game, most campaigns start at level 1, your AC is equal to those of your party members. And so when you taunt an enemy, you are actually more vulnerable than your party members to hits and especially critical hits. Then compared to the other tanky character class, the champion, you achieve the next tier of defense proficiency 2 levels before the champion. And so that means 14 out of the 20 levels, the champion's armor class is actually equal to yours, before taking taunt into account. Another thing you have as a Guardian is the shield block reaction, so you can soak damage with your shield. However, you have to raise your shield before you can shield block with it, and you're already spending an action to taunt if you're the Guardian. And so if you want to negate the penalty caused by your own taunt, you're left with only 1 action left to do anything else. The other thing you have is armor specialization. At level 1, no other class gets it that early. However, at the first several levels, most armors give you resistance 2 to one kind of physical damage, like slashing or piercing. Maybe that's decent at level 1 or 2, but there are many monsters in the game that have more than one damage type. And it doesn't scale very well as you get into higher levels. And at level 7, as you can see in this clip, an enemy 1 level higher that crits you can do as much as 48 damage, doubling what would have been there before. And by taunting a foe, you can increase your chances significantly of being crit by a foe. So in light of that, the 3 damage reduction seems minor. So I'd like to compare what Taunt does to the champion's Lay on Hands focus spell. Now, sure, it's a focus spell. You can only do it once per combat, assuming you have at least 10 minutes between combats to refocus, which is almost always true. But that's once per combat. That's significant. Well, what it does is it increases the ally's armor class and saving throws, and additionally heals that ally, making you more of a priority to the enemy. Why deal more damage to your ally when you can reverse it with your healing? What Taunt does is it makes it harder to hit that ally and, to be fair, all your other allies, but it also makes it easier for them to attack you. And I'm not entirely convinced this extra incentive to attack you is necessary. After all, every -1 or -2 or -3 matters in this game. Wouldn't they want to hit your allies instead? And I think it's important to mention that Taunt does nothing. In fact, it's harmful to use against a foe that has an area of effect attack. In the third fight against the dragon, we had the Guardian player not sure what to do with this third action and not taunting because they were in breath weapon formation. Also, I think for many players, there will be a thematic disconnect using this ability. In D&D 4th edition, when you mark a foe, you can see yourself being overbearing on that enemy, making it harder for them to attack other people because you're so intimidating and distracting. One could say that with Taunt here, but for the fact that you're also making yourself easier to hit. And you can do it at a 30-foot distance. And it's not clear what you're doing in the fiction. The player of one of the Guardians said it felt like saying nanner, nanner, nanner. And the other Guardian player really went into it and was inspired by Face McShooty from Borderlands.
Not the arm, not the spine, face! It has to happen! Face shot, boom, squish, shoot me in the face!
He actually had a lot of fun role-playing that character, but I don't think most players who see this heavily armored, tanky, tough Guardian have that as what they imagine their character is doing as a Guardian. The next point I want to make is the danger of crits and critical failures in Pathfinder 2e. In a luck-based system where the party is generally supposed to win, because that's how you build and design encounters. They're going to win nearly all encounters. You are going to want to avoid outliers, big swings of luck away from the median. There's the saying that every +1 matters, and if that's true, then every +2 matters twice as much. Remember how critical hits work with the 4 degrees of success system. If you need to roll a 19 on a die roll to critically hit a foe, getting a +2 on your attack means you are doubling the chance of critically hitting that foe. Sometimes you're even tripling the chances. And sometimes, if you're a guardian, if you taunt a foe, you will critically fail on your saving throw against some potent attack. And as a wise man once said, it don't fit if it means you get crit. And the designers are actually conscious of this, that you're much more likely to get crit if you taunt a foe. And that's why one of the class features that you can choose is to reduce the damage you get from critical hits. Not critical failures on saving throws, mind you, but just critical hits by a foe's attack. This is so impactful and dangerous for the Guardian that we had this strange moment at one point in our playtest. When they were fighting the dragon, they actually were happy that the dragon critically succeeded on its saving throw against Taunt.
Taunt.
Ah, you're taunting it. I think it critically succeeded.
So it does nothing, which is honestly upside.
Yeah.
All right, that's my turn.
Wait, there's an upside to this?
Yeah, because there's no
yeah, you
penalties
don't have
or
the negative
minuses.
effects of taunt.
It's just
Yeah, it doesn't get the bonus either if it's unaffected.
yeah.
Oh, that's so weird.
Yeah.
So you'd rather it critically succeed than succeed.
That's weird. Okay.
Yeah, right?
Yes.
Because if it had merely succeeded, the dragon would have had a -1 penalty attacking the allies, which they did not think was worth the higher vulnerability of the Guardian. There actually was one suggestion on the subreddit to revise Taunt so that the bonus in attacking the Guardian only happened if the target critically succeeded on their saving throw. I see the logic in that, and this removes the greater danger to the Guardian with all the other degrees of success and maintains the risk of making the Guardian more vulnerable. I probably would have kept the -1 to attack your allies on a regular success, however, so that it still had some effect against boss creatures. So as you can see, I'm pretty clearly on the side that Taunt needs help. And here are some ideas that I think they should consider for changing it. First, I'm not sure whether it should cost an action. Actions are precious in Pathfinder. And the features of the Guardian, the class kit you get at level 1, seem to suggest a certain routine, so to speak, that you should use on a turn, which is to walk up next to an ally to set up Intercept Strike, be in the foe's face, and then taunt a foe, and then raise your shield to mitigate your greater vulnerability from taunting. That is very action intensive, and I just contrast it to the D&D 4th edition fighter who marked a foe just by attacking it. It didn't require any extra action investment, and it automatically succeeded, no check necessary. And by the way, I don't think the 4E fighter was all sunshine and rainbows. I thought it was a bit fiddly tracking what enemies you marked. I just bring it up to bring up another possibility, something to think about. And that leads to my next question. Should it require a check? Maybe it should just automatically succeed against a foe. It makes it less fiddly. It might streamline it in play and make it quicker to resolve. I'm not aware of another class that has an ability that calls on an enemy to make a saving throw constantly. It just seems like from the player's perspective, that's a little frustrating. It can get frustrating. Even if overall the ability needed to be weakened to account for automatically succeeding, that might be desirable. Another possibility to deal with the action cost of Taunt is to make it free when you do X. And that X, for example, could be something like raising your shield. And that's a popular idea I've seen in the forums. Why not taunt for free when you raise your shield? It counteracts the defensive penalty you take when you successfully taunt a foe. Or what if you taunt a foe for free when you intercept their strike with your other Guardian reaction? So that way you're debuffing the foe while you're defending your ally. And for comparison's sake, we have the Redeemer champion, they have a reaction called Glimpse of Redemption. It presents the enemy the choice of doing no damage or doing reduced damage but becoming enfeebled 2 until the end of its next turn. Most monsters will elect to do the damage and become enfeebled 2. And enfeebled 2, if they're a melee foe, is basically like the Taunt's ability without any drawback to the champion. And it succeeds automatically, no check required. So yes, it's like a free taunt that did not require an action, that automatically succeeded, and did not make yourself more vulnerable when it happens. Another idea that came up in our playtest group is, what if you had a reaction to attack a foe or do something else harmful to them if after you taunt them, they ignore you? This actually reminds me of the 4E fighter also. If they try to attack an enemy without including you, you can make a free melee strike against them. That certainly would incentivize them to attack you instead of their ally, instead of making yourself more punchable. And back to the fiddliness issue, I did find it a bit annoying to roll a saving throw for a foe every time someone taunted.
Taunt, the whirlwind. You look like a big fart! Come hit me in the face!
Oh, I have to make a saving throw?
Yeah, I'm sorry.
And I thought, okay, while we're at it, why not just create an area if the Guardian enters, say, a stance in which that Guardian is having some effect on the battlefield. Their sheer presence automatically imposes a debuff on enemies. Maybe require an intimidation check, the way some of the abilities of the martial archetype does, sure. The point being that you'd have this passive effect that can affect more than one enemy, but kind of you can see taking place within the fiction. It's just your presence that affects everyone in a small area. The next big ability to talk about, of course, is Intercept Strike. This is the reaction when an adjacent ally, so someone standing right next to you, takes physical damage. You make sure they take no damage, and all of that damage is directed to you instead. And in addition, you get to resist all of the triggering damage. The amount you resist is like what a champion gets. It's 2 plus your level. Now let's compare it to the good aligned champion reactions, back when alignment existed in the core rulebook. One pro is that, unlike the champion, you don't have to have your ally be victimized and targeted before your main feature is triggered. You can use Taunt, for example, to make that enemy attack you instead. I just think it's fair here to consider your totality of abilities as a Guardian. Another pro is that you get to negate all the damage against your ally versus just reducing that damage. There was a moment in our second fight where the Spirit of Wrestling did a critical hit that could have knocked down the squishy bard, but the Guardian who was standing next to them was able to negate that damage entirely. Oh, jeez. Here's our... The healer goes
20.
down!
I'm gonna intercept that.
Strike is declared.
Guardian Clemming and Clutch here. Now in this specific scenario, the champion's reaction would have been enough to keep the bard up. However, being able to negate all the damage will be important sometimes. Another advantage for the Guardian is that you can choose who gets damage. It's our damage dispersal idea from earlier. Now if you can make yourself super tough and super resilient, then you have that choice to, yes, redirect damage to yourself and protect the party as a whole. And whether you're able to do that is something we'll get to elsewhere in the video. A con is that compared to the champion's reaction, you do not punish the enemy. You don't debuff the enemy. We just saw a Glimpse of Redemption, which makes that enemy enfeebled too. Retrospective Strike obviously harms the enemy. Intercept Strike does nothing to the enemy. Another con is the lack of range. You have to be adjacent to your ally. It doesn't matter if you have reach, you have to be standing right next to them. In contrast, the champion's reaction requires that you be within 15 feet of your ally and 15 feet of the enemy. In our second fight, we had a frustrating moment for the Guardian when it was grappled by the Spirit of Wrestling. The fighter went into a flanking position opposite of the Guardian.
Escape will involve multi-attack penalty of -10.
I just want to point out this is a bit of a frustrating moment for the Guardian because, yeah.
Yeah.
I'm gonna roll that.
I have 4
Because
third actions
all
in boss
Taunt
fights.
does is...
Yeah, there's not a lot of third actions to take here.
Taunting would have made it more dangerous for him, and Intercept Strike couldn't trigger because the fighter wasn't adjacent to him. So neither of your two core actions as a Guardian is ideal when you're flanking a foe, which is actually one of the more effective ways you can draw attention in Pathfinder, because you increase your accuracy and your allies' accuracy both. Now, one positive thing about the Guardian reaction is that you do not need proximity to an enemy. There's many situations in which the champion is not close enough to the enemy and wants to use their reaction but can't. Here, an enemy from 100 feet away firing a bow shot against your ally, if you're next to the ally, you can intercept. However, it still kind of felt bad to be a Guardian and being 10 feet away from an ally and not be able to do anything to help them. I wonder whether having a free step as part of the Intercept Strike reaction would be overpowered. Maybe it wouldn't. There is one feat called Mobile Protection that increases the range of your Intercept Strike effectively. It lets you stride 10 feet as part of your Intercept Strike reaction. However, it's the second feat in a feat chain, and it only works for one ally who you designate during your daily preparations. Now, I understand why they would want to gate this behind feats, because mobility is very powerful in this game. It just feels bad to me that a class that you would imagine is in the front lines, and in a game which really incentivizes flanking, to not be able to flank with that character in concert with your main abilities. Another con is that Intercept Strike is limited to physical damage, and it was fiddly and inelegant in how it interacted with other kinds of damage. The champion reactions gave your ally resistance to all damage, and that is very powerful, especially if the incoming damage had more than one type of damage. That reduction in damage happens to each type of damage. That also has the advantage of simplicity. You don't have to deal with complexities like I'm about to go over. Here the trigger is physical damage, so that's bludgeoning, piercing, slashing, and also apparently bleed damage. Now, this makes the Guardian feel sad when dealing with foes who deal energy damage, and that happened in the second fight. Also, if a foe in an attack does both physical and energy damage from a flaming sword, for example, then according to this as written, only the physical damage from, let's say the slashing damage from the sword, transfers over to you, the Guardian. The flame still hits your ally. So in our third fight against the dragon, there was a moment where the dragon did both slashing and fire damage with its claw. The slashing damage transferred over to the Guardian when it intercepted it, but the fire damage stuck with the original target. Also, one of the Guardian players took Intercept Energy in order to deal with energy damage, and they had an unpleasant surprise when encountering the void damage from the ghost.
It is then going to punch Vergash in the face.
Oh, jeez.
Bang.
I used my reaction to intercept that.
Intercept Energy does not let you intercept void damage.
Correct.
Isn't void energy?
It is normally.
What?
However, Intercept
normally.
Energy does not list it under the... It does not say energy damage,
Oh,
despite
you're right.
the name.
It doesn't.
It lists...
It lists. Yeah.
Yeah,
came up-
with
That's a bunch
specific
of hard
types.
energy types.
And later in the same fight, there was a time when the ghost did a submission lock, which inflicted void damage on the foe, and the champion was able to use their reaction. So we basically have a Guardian having to take a level 4 feat to have their reaction affect only some of the energy types that champions already can affect starting at level 1. We also had a strange rules interaction come up. The diabolic dragon that they fought has this ability called Diabolic Fire. Whenever it does fire damage to a foe, it gets to treat that damage as spirit damage instead, if that would be more detrimental to the foe. Taken literally, this would mean that this is ignored by the Intercept Energy feat. I ruled it differently, however, but as you can see, all of this complexity can be avoided by just giving resistance to all damage. Another question came up for me when I was reading through the 2 playtest classes, and this also came up in the discussion we had. Why not give the commander's level 2 feat called Defensive Swap to the Guardian? Let's look at what it does. It lets you, when an adjacent ally is the target of an attack roll, you get to interpose yourself, you get to swap places with your ally. And the enemy's attack resolves against you instead. Surely, as a level 2 class feat, it can't be too strong to be a class feature for a class. It's completely on theme with the Guardian, and it has the added benefit that it targets your armor class instead of your allies, and yours is probably better than your allies, if you haven't taunted at least. And moving your ally to where you used to be could be very important to protecting them. Maybe the monster no longer has reach to your ally. And I have to say, it feels thematically off to me the way the current Guardian reaction works, where you use your ally's armor class when you are interposing yourself. And here you could be raising your shield and force the enemy to attack your armor class, your improved armor class, instead of your allies. In fact, a commander with this feat is probably more effective at defending an adjacent ally than you are. And while we're looking at commander feats that might be more on theme with the Guardian, let's look at a couple more. There is the level 4 feat called Shielded Recovery, where you are a better battle medic. You get to use your shield hand to use healer's tools. And also, when you use battle medicine on an ally, you improve their armor class and reflex saves until the start of your next turn. This gives you some of that healing ability that you lack compared to the champion, and as I said before, draws attention to you because you can negate the damage your enemies do. Then there's the level 10 Standard Bearer's Sacrifice feat for the commander, which is basically a better version of Intercept Strike for ranged attacks. You get to redirect the enemy's attack to you against your armor class, and you simply have to be able to observe the enemy. You don't have to be adjacent to your ally in order for this to work. Granted, they must fail a will saving throw. However, this is very much on theme with the idea of a tank, but it's not available to the Guardian. And it's not out of the question for the Guardian to be able to do this. The commander has their banner, and you have your personality. You're able to taunt people after all. Okay, so keeping in mind that tanking involves drawing attention and being able to withstand that extra attention, let's look at whether the Guardian is doing what it needs to do to be able to withstand that attention. And I think it's a bit lacking here, given that you would think that the Guardian should be able to take more punishment than the champion, the other tank class, because more than the champion, the Guardian is trying to actually direct more damage at itself. That seems to be the overall focus of the Guardian as compared to the champion, which can do other things too. Given that the champion has comparable armor class to the Guardian at most levels, the Guardian using Taunt actually makes it easier to hit and to crit the Guardian than the champion. And this is true during the first 4 levels of play. Meanwhile, it does not have more hit points than the champion. They both get 10 hit points per level. From our one playtest, to be fair, none of the Guardians got knocked out, and so we can't really make a final verdict here. However, I will point out that the Guardian lacks a self-healing ability that the champion does have with Lay on Hands, which is obviously an important part of a class's ability to sustain damage. The Guardian is hurt by not being able to resist all damage types the way the champion's reaction is able to. It hurt badly in the fight with the Ghost, which did void damage, which even the Guardian who took the Intercept Energy feat had no resistance against. Now I want to take an enlightening moment from our playtest to make the point that you can read too much into these side-by-side comparisons. Here, the Bard was in trouble and was getting focused on, and as you can see, was near 0 health. And the Bard was prevented from being knocked out by both the work of the champion up here and the Guardian. The champion had cast Lay on Hands and healed the Bard, which also improved their armor class and made them a somewhat less appealing target. The Spirit of Wrestling, meanwhile, was grappling the Bard, and at this time, the Guardian taunted the Ghost so that the Ghost would want to attack the Guardian instead. So on the Luchador's next turn, it had a choice of one of these 3 targets. These 2 characters were protecting the Bard. After a first attack, the Ghost had the multiple attack penalty. And at this point, Swing Ripper Mycogiem and I thought it made sense for the Ghost to attack the Guardian. Because of the taunt, It had a +2 to attack the Guardian, and it had -2 to attack the Bard, who was much lower health. Because of the multiple attack penalty, it was very unlikely to hit the Bard at all.
And then it is going to not like you, Dunbar.
Of course.
Wait, didn't Red Walls taunt it before?
Yes.
It is going to now try and attack you with that nice bonus you just gave it.
Bring it right here in my face.
Which it hits due to that bonus.
Now this shows the shortcomings of looking at only the 2 classes' relative armor classes. Here, the Ghost, if it had attacked the champion, yes, would have missed. However, the fact that it was considering a target that was not the low health Bard in the first place was because of what the Guardian did. This is an instance of successful damage dispersal by the Guardian. You directed damage from the Bard who was about to be knocked out to yourself. Now on how to improve the Guardian's toughness, the idea was raised of increasing its hit points per level. However, people in our playtest group seem to like more the idea of giving the Guardian more resistance to damage. They thought it was more on theme with a heavily armored class, and it also mechanically has the benefit of making healing of the Guardian more efficient. In D&D 4e, healing happened through a mechanic called a healing surge, which was a percentage of your total health, and tank characters tended to have more total health. So a healing effect, which used a healing surge, actually healed more hit points to a tankier character in 4e. For the Guardian to have more resistance to damage makes healing of the Guardian more of an efficient prospect. It gives you more bang for your hit point buck. There was also something I observed in the playtest, which was when one of the Guardians became more effective at what he did, he became less able to use his Guardian abilities because his own pool of hit points was getting too low. Yes, you want to direct damage to yourself to keep everybody else up, but they still need you alive or conscious. So later in the same half of the wrestler fight, the Guardian and the Bard kind of switched situations. It was now the Guardian who had low health. And in that situation, the Guardian did not want to taunt the Ghost into attacking her. So the player did a third attack with a maximum multiple attack penalty instead of taunt. Basically, its class features were not available at this time because of its low health. And so it made me wonder, maybe there should be a mechanic to make you tougher if your health goes below 50%, bloodied in 4E jargon. That might be an interesting way to allow you to have more endurance in a fight. Maybe something like having greater resistances, something that allows you to continue to play the role that you were built to play. Next, I want to talk about, I think, an unexplored part of tanking that the playtest only goes into a little, which is controlling enemy movement. In a system where movement costs an action, this seems like a very effective way to tie up enemies, make them waste time, make them want to get rid of you because you're so annoying. And by the way, being annoying could be another fair definition of a tank. That's why Swing Ripper is such a good tank. Again, using the 4E fighter as an example, their opportunity attack, if successful, stops the movement of the enemy, and probably means that enemy cannot move that turn. In this playtest, we have a commander class, which puts a lot of emphasis into the positioning side of the game, usually positioning your allies. And there seems to be an unexplored design space for a character class to have abilities that put enemies where they don't want to be, or force them to stay in places they don't want to be. Of course, the one ability in this playtest that does that, and perhaps too well, is Hampering Sweeps, the level 2 feat that with an action means that you are basically super sticky until the start of your next turn. Anyone who goes within the reach of your weapon can never leave the reach of your weapon. There is no check involved, it works automatically. It's generally agreed in the community that this feat is too strong and overpowered, but this doesn't have to be its final version for the Guardian. Still, this illustrates how impactful controlling enemy movement can be. It's definitely a great way to draw attention because it can't give attention to any of your allies if they're a melee enemy. This is assuming, of course, that you've created some distance between yourself and your allies. So in our first fight, we had this synergy between the two guardians, where this guardian here taunted an enemy, this fire elemental that was next to the second guardian, and the second guardian had hampering sweeps. When it became the fire elemental's turn, it wanted to attack the taunting guardian, but couldn't because it was stuck. It had to attack this guardian with the -2 penalty. Sure, this required 2 guardians, and I don't know if it's a synergy that was intended by the designers, maybe it's too strong, but it does illustrate that there's more to being a tank than making yourself very punchable. And in fact, for one of these players who's continuing to playtest the guardian, he says that he is using hampering sweeps almost all the time and hardly ever uses taunt, because hampering sweeps does a better job than taunt when he moves away from the rest of his party in keeping monsters stuck to him. And it doesn't make him more vulnerable to critical hits. We also talked about how this could have been very useful in the third fight against the dragon, a flying dragon. Hampering sweeps, once a flying foe that wants to maintain distance between itself and you gets within range, can be used to lock down that foe, and it can do nothing about it. In fact, this might have been better to do that instead of grappling that dragon once it was in range, because it has no chance to fail. So I just want to shoot out some other possibilities that they may want to consider that control enemy movement. First is, what if the Guardian had reactive strike at level 1, just like fighters? It's a way to punish an enemy for moving. It came up in the second fight when a enemy tried to run past the fighter was able to react. And I thought, wow, this is exactly what a tank should be doing, punishing moving past you. The fighter did a critical hit, as you can see, and that actually caused the red cap here to change its target priority from the Guardian, who it was originally going after, to the fighter, who just did a buttload of damage to it. As you can see, its health bar went down to about 5%. Now, it doesn't have to be exactly like Reactive Strike, but maybe something like Reactive Strike would be appropriate for the Guardian. Maybe there can be fewer triggers, just move actions. Maybe let's take a cue from 4E, where if you successfully hit the foe with your reaction, you stop their movement, even on a regular success. So yes, it would be more powerful than the current level 6 monk feat, which requires a critical success. But that is something that sounds like a defining first level class feature for a melee tank, which I think the Guardian is intended to be. And it's not like it completely locks them down like in 4E. They might still be able to move with the 3-action economy, they might have more actions, but you have cost them an action and some hit points. Now this would be a third reaction for the Guardian on top of Intercept Strike and Shield Block, and I don't think that's necessarily a bad thing or necessarily too complicated. It provides interesting decisions for how you want to use your one reaction. Another possibility is, what if Intercept Strike not only redirects the damage to you, but you get to do a free athletics maneuver against the foe, something like reposition to try to move them away from your ally, or trip to debuff their attacks and make them more vulnerable. In fact, there is a level 6 feat that allows you to do a free disarm attempt against the foe that you intercept. So this shows that they have been thinking about doing things to annoy and debuff your enemies simultaneously with your class features. However, I'm not sure it should be gated behind a level 6 feat and to only one of the maneuvers, which, moreover, is only useful sometimes. Most enemies don't have a weapon to disarm. Now, maybe the designers are right in gating such a free maneuver the way they are. However, I just feel like being able to do those kinds of things to enemies, there should be more of that, or it should be more accessible for the Guardian. Being annoying should be easier for this tank. Another idea is, what if when you taunt an enemy, you have a reaction that triggers if they try to ignore you? This is also a callback to 4E. When you mark a foe in 4E as a fighter, if they try to attack somebody else in your party that does not include you, you get to do a free melee attack against that foe. This would definitely be a strong incentive for an enemy to include you in an attack. And next we get to the threat technique, which is decidedly meh. You would expect from a class feature that it would be more powerful than this is. They are usually the defining features of a class that other classes cannot easily get through archetypes. At level 1, the Guardian has a choice of Ferocious Vengeance or Mitigate Harm. Ferocious Vengeance is very conditional. You deal 2 additional damage if you taunt a creature, and they do a hostile action that does not include you as a target. They probably did it on their turn. This additional damage lasts only until your next turn ends. So there's a moment in our playtest where the Guardian did attack a creature and succeeded at getting it to attack the Guardian, but because they succeeded, no extra damage.
Because the wildfire attacked me, and I'm the one who taunted it, I don't get my bonus damage because that's the build I went with. I went with the Furious Vengeance, I think is what it's called.
You've already spent an action, the way a Barbarian or a Ranger will spend an action to hone in on an enemy for an entire combat, by the way. It's not clear to me why you would only get pissed at somebody if they attack your ally and not you. I thought we were getting away from the idea of the champion here, where you're reacting to an attack on your ally. You're being more proactive. There was one time in the playtest, in our 3 fights, where it did trigger, and the player, who already was inclined to not like it, expressed his dissatisfaction.
Because I taunted the luchador, and because the luchador took a hostile action to someone other than me, my Ferocious Vengeance applies, which is a whopping extra 2 damage.
The number of damage dice?
Yeah,
2 damage against only that creature, by the way.
Yep.
The other choice is Mitigate Harm, which lowers the damage you take from the target of your taunt if they critically hit you. So, because you taunt them, you likely made it more likely for them to critically hit you in the first place. So this is kind of compensation for that. I already pointed out the issue here. In this game, you don't want to get critically hit, period, and you make that more likely when you taunt a creature successfully. So this comes off as a kind of a weak consolation prize. At level 7 in our playtest, we saw a critical hit do 48 damage, and if this had applied, it would have reduced the damage by 7. And now I want to move on to a general observation that I saw echoed on some forums, that there's generally a lack of harmony between the class features of the Guardian. I want to contrast the Guardian with the 4E Fighter, which shows harmony among its class features. The 4E Fighter is not a generalist fighter like the Pathfinder fighter is. It's focused on the defender combat role. And the 4E Fighter, every time they attack a creature, they mark a creature, whether or not they hit. Marking a creature debuffs that creature. It makes it harder for them to attack your allies. And your other abilities make it harder for foes you're next to leave your reach or to otherwise ignore you. Here there's a clear through line of how you're supposed to play the 4E Fighter. You're supposed to get into an enemy's face, make attacks if you can, and make them stick to you. They must attack you or be punished attacking somebody else, and moreover, they're less accurate attacking that someone else. Also, your opportunity attacks, which are more accurate, if they hit, they make the enemy stop moving, and even if they don't hit, because it was an attack, you mark the foe, you trigger your other fighter ability. You can see that these abilities support each other and trigger each other for the same task of being up in an enemy's face and forcing them to deal with you instead of your allies. For the Guardian, we see that their 2 big actions are at odds. The purpose of Taunt is to make enemies attack you, and it actually seems more useful positionally when you have some distance between yourself and the foe that you're taunting. If you can convince the enemy to attack you, they have to spend an action, waste an action, getting to you. Even better if you are separate from your allies so that that enemy is no longer threatening your allies. Meanwhile, Intercept Strike only works if you're standing right next to an ally. One of our Guardian playtesters, who I asked to be in the front lines, initially planned it to take Shielded Taunt, that lets you taunt for free when you raise your shield. However, I asked him to take Hampering Sweeps because we wanted to see that in action. So we actually dropped Shielded Taunt, not just for the feat slot, but because Hampering Sweeps incentivize him to get out in front of the party, ahead of the party, and away from his allies so that he can lock the enemies around himself instead of having them reach his backline. Meanwhile, the 4E Fighter succeeds at making it harder to get past them simply by walking up to a foe, and that's starting at level 1. Now, I've seen a counter argument to this point I'm making, that in Pathfinder, you want to have different tools for different situations. We don't want our characters doing the same thing every turn, locked into an optimal rotation. But I would counter the counter by saying that interesting decisions in Pathfinder 2 are already fostered by the 3-action economy, where you have different activities or actions competing for your limited 3 actions. I don't know of the other instance where a class has 2 base features that are competing with each other that are more useful in different kinds of situations. That's just not intuitive, and it usually means that when you're using part of your base kit, the rest of your base kit is not available or just not desirable at that same time. The Guardian I described had no use for Intercept Strike at all, leaving the rest of their party members behind. Perhaps I'm describing a possible subclass arrangement where one Guardian focuses on one thing and another focuses on another. And this is not the only instance of lack of harmony, I'm going to call it, for the Guardian. We have Taunt existing, which wants you to not stick around after you taunt a foe, with the fact that you have so many tools for being in the front lines. You have the high hit points, you have the best defenses. You have strength as a key ability score telling you you want to be in the thick of things, doing heavy damage, and doing athletics maneuvers. And with Taunt, you want to ideally not be in the front lines, especially if an enemy has an AoE attack, in which case you don't want to be bunched up with their allies. It's actually a net minus to taunt the enemy the way Taunt is written. It doesn't protect your allies if they include you in the AoE. There are also certain features that don't work well together. For example, when you taunt a foe successfully and make yourself more vulnerable, you would think that you would want to raise your shield at that time to offset the penalty. But each of those costs an action, so you have only one action left when you set this up. And if you're a melee fighter and need to move up to a foe to attack something anyway, you are very action starved. Also, you have the shield block reaction at level 1, which incentivizes you to have a shield and to raise it so that you can protect yourself from damage. If you position yourself next to an ally to set up Intercept Strike to protect that ally and raise your shield, the enemy's attack still resolves against your ally's armor class. Your raised shield does nothing for your ally. And when you intercept that strike, you can do nothing with that raised shield to absorb any of that damage. You've already used your one reaction. So the idea of being a shielded guardian protecting yourself and your allies, well, your shield protects only you and not your ally. And if you want to make the enemy actually attack you, you have to spend 2 actions to set that up. And also we have what I observed earlier, that you are less threatening offensively deliberately by the designers, and therefore you want to direct damage to yourself. You are less accurate than other martial classes. But at the same time, you have strength as your key attribute, which is key to threatening harm to your enemies. It seems we have 2 opposing visions competing with each other. And now I want to take on the issue of whether a slower attack progression for the Guardian is necessary. Most martials in this game become expert in their weapon strikes at level 5 and master at level 13. The Guardian, their progression is delayed. They get them at level 7 and level 17. And this is closer actually to what the Cleric with the War Priest doctrine has. It's almost identical except for a couple of levels very late in the game. And I think we'd agree that the Cleric has a lot more going for it in its other base features than the current Guardian does. The idea here seems to be that they're prioritizing defense over offense, hence this slower progression. I think there's been a tension in the design that I think has been apparent in this video so far. Part of what you want to do to defend your party members is to draw attention. Usually how you draw attention in this game as a martial is by being an offensive threat, but there is a commitment in this draft Guardian design to make you decidedly less threatening than other martial characters. And I wonder if that is too dogmatic of a position to take. And I want to say it is okay to be offensive. I think that the class fantasy that they're going for and that people want is being in people's face, defending your allies, and also able to throw a punch yourself as part of that toolkit. But instead we have this, what I'm calling the victim design, where you are designed to be less threatening offensively, and your contribution to the party is saying, no, don't hit them, hit me. I'm thinking that maybe they just need to abandon this idea of lowering your offensive threat and just focus on what tanking is. What will it take to draw the attention of the enemies? And work from that premise. So why not have your attack progression be the same as every other martial and have what I'm calling offensive defensive abilities? I think the most typical example of this would be the Paladin's Retributive Strike reaction. If an enemy damages a nearby ally, you get to make a strike against that foe. And the Pathfinder 2e designers know how to do abilities like this, and here is the level 10 Barbarian feat, Come and Get Me, where you spend an action, while raging, to make yourself off guard to enemy attacks and give them a modest damage bonus against you. But if they choose to hit you, you can punish them back. They become off guard to you until the end of your next turn. And if you hit them, you get high off the thrill and get temporary hit points. Now there's a few feats in this playtest for the Guardian that have the effect of punishing an enemy while you play your defensive role. Notably, something that the fighter gets at level 1, Reactive Strike, is a level 6 feat for the Guardian. And there's Armored Counterattack, but that's a level 12 feat. And it seems to me that being offensive-defensive should be more accessible to a Guardian. One possible design space for this is to buff the Taunt action, where you pose more of an offensive threat against the target of your taunt. As of now, there is not much you can do to leverage Taunt to damage that foe. It's basically a hit me ability. The one exception being Ferocious Vengeance, which, as I said, is too situational and does not do enough damage to feel appropriately vengeful. So what if they make an attack that does not include you, you make a strike against the target of your taunt? This would have the same effect of making them want to target you instead of your allies, while not making yourself more vulnerable. I also want to bring up a blast from the past from 1st edition Pathfinder, the Cavalier's Challenge ability. The Cavalier was able to designate a foe as their challenge. The Cavalier lowers their defense against all the other enemies, but against the target of their challenge they get extra damage. One possible idea is you have an ability, kind of like the Ranger's Hunt Prey, where you designate a single foe and you too have greater offense against each other. And keeping this idea of designating a foe in combat as your mark, let's call it, what if it had the effect of making them less accurate against your allies, no more accurate against you, and it lasts the whole combat? I don't know if that's overpowered, but I think that is kind of what people want in a Guardian, or maybe that could be achieved through progression and feats. Just want to put that out there. Another thing that came up in our playtest group discussion was that the Guardian does not have a very good perception. And you would think that a class focused on reacting and defending others from danger would be better in this regard. They are only trained in perception, unlike a number of other classes, including the fighter. And it only goes up to expert at level 7 when the fighter becomes a master in perception. The only other thing in this playtest I believe that gets to this idea of you being prepared for danger is this feature, which guarantees that you have a reaction before your first turn in combat. However, that is something that the GM already is able to grant characters starting at level 1 when the situation is appropriate. And in fact, I make that standard practice when a character uses the defend exploration activity or scout exploration activity. They always have a reaction before the first turn in my games. One of our Guardian playtesters said that exploration mode is something that the Guardian could excel in.
I will say, though, that I wish the Guardian actually had some kind of additional thing for their exploration activities.
Yeah.
There is the defend action if you have a shield, but it only benefits yourself.
Yeah, exactly. So
I think special exploration activities is a very underdeveloped design space.
100% agree.
I'd be excited to see like more general feats that interact with it, for example.
They also brought up the idea of Guardians having a free action when they roll initiative, like gunslingers currently do, for example, to stride when combat starts, or do something else. I also wondered whether there should be more in the Guardian's basic class features supporting athletics maneuvers. I've come around to the Swing Ripper school of thought that one of the more effective ways to tank is to deny actions to your enemies, and athletics skill actions are a premier way to do so. When you are grappled or tripped, it costs an action to undo the condition, and escaping from a grapple has the attack trait debuffing any future attacks you make. This is particularly effective when you're fighting a boss creature that's higher level than the party. One action for that boss is equivalent to several actions by your party members. Also, we see the playtest commander prioritizing positioning in combat. And as I said earlier, what if the Guardian were excelling at repositioning or shoving foes? Now, we already see that the designers think that the Guardian should do athletics maneuvers, and they're basically available through feats. We also see that they have made strength a key ability score, so they're in the same mind space. One of my Guardian playtesters said they had this idea of the Guardian being a de-escalator, someone who tries to avoid or de-escalate conflict through non-lethal actions. So I wonder, what if there were a level 1 feature or maybe a very early feat that lets you do an athletics maneuver for free against a foe who dares attack your ally, who you use your Intercept Strike reaction against. So you take the damage instead of your ally, but you can now shove that foe, or try to shove that foe, as part of your reaction. There actually is currently a level 6 feat that gives you a free disarm attempt. However, that's at level 6, and disarm is arguably the least important to get because it can only be used on a subset of enemies that have a weapon. And I'm wondering whether doing athletics maneuvers as part of your basic actions, your kit, basic kit, should be more available and available earlier. And I now want to also point out that there are different class fantasies besides big armored tank, which this playtest definitely leans into, that serve the tank function, which is to draw attention and be able to withstand attention. One of my Guardian playtesters, the same one who had this idea of the Guardian being a de-escalator, had the class fantasy of being like a Secret Service agent or a bodyguard, someone who's not in heavy armor. Someone whose skill set is being very vigilant, quick, and reactive, so not necessarily strength-based. So this might be a subclass for the Guardian, or maybe even a class archetype that alters the base class features. Maybe they don't have heavy armor proficiency, but they get a free action of some sort when they roll initiative. The idea came up in Reddit threads and elsewhere that perhaps the optimal way to play the Guardian is to take long-distance taunt, which lets you taunt from 120 feet, and maintain a great distance from the enemy and try to draw enemies towards you with your taunt. After all, if you're far away, the downside of taunt, making the enemy more accurate against you, is less so if they're a melee monster. Well, one of our playtesters made that build, and he was the one in our playtest who roleplayed Face McShooty. And he gave it an honest shot. He did what he could with this build to make this effective, but he, and I think the group agrees, thought it wasn't very effective. First, his key ability score was strength, and first he took a bow and used his gold budget to advance that, and focused on his dexterity, but his key attribute was strength, which at level 7, to be fair, did not penalize his bow attacks. He had a +4 in dexterity. However, because his class DC was based on strength, his taunts were less effective.
Real quick, I have a question.
Yeah.
Ak, how do you have a 23 class DC? Is mine supposed to be 23, or do you have
I
something
am
that
better
boosts
than
it?
you.
It should be 23, actually, if it's maxed out.
It's strength base. Is your strength up there?
That's why. My
Yeah.
strength is lower than yours.
Yeah, because of the range.
Yep, ranged guardian.
Interesting.
Okay.
By making strength the key ability score, they're assuming all guardians will be melee. Okay.
Yep.
Yeah.
It also meant that once an enemy did close into him, which was the goal, right, of this build, he was less effective with melee attacks.
So she's gonna look at the ghost and go, "I'm gonna fuck your face with my face!" Ah! No. Now I'll see if I could beat the damage reduction.
I hope that's the killing blow. I really hope that's the killing blow.
I really doubt it.
Nah.
Oh, I want the. Oh man.
Oh no.
Yeah,
Oh,
my
no.
damage is...
Yeah.
This is where I wish I had a melee weapon instead of the longbow, because... yeah.
Yeah.
I'm very glad I held on to Piranha Assault.
Yeah, the tusks were just supposed to be a backup, not a primary.
He also said afterward that if you're building to be at ranged and try to draw the enemy toward you, you're basically probably abandoning half of your class kit, because you want generally to be adjacent to your allies and protect them with Intercept Strike. And I'll say the obvious point here that most people who choose the Guardian or look to the Guardian probably don't have the fantasy of being a face McShooty in their party. It also came up in our group discussion, why not have an aggro ability for the Guardian that compels an enemy to come towards you? Now, I understand why Pathfinder avoids this for mundane martial classes, but we have a precedent of a martial class having spells in the Ranger. It could be an option that Guardians could take to have a focus spell, let's say, that can compel a foe to attack you, move toward you, or do something to you. And then someone in the playtest group made the comment that's one of those vague comments that actually seems to be getting at something true. And they said that it felt like the Guardian was reactive and not proactive. And that got me to thinking something that I think is a broader point about this class, that there are fewer moments in the fiction of the fantasy where you feel like you assert you are a Guardian, where you make the enemies in awe of your abilities. Badass moments. The Champion class has clear moments like this. The Paladin with the Retributive Strike, how dare you hit my ally? Or a Guilty Look with Glimpse of Redemption. But the core features for the Guardian involve either saying hit me or being hit. Okay, to be fair, Intercept Strike is kind of badass. You are intercepting the foe, surprising the foe. But I'm talking more about things like Hampering Sweeps, which yes is overpowered, but still. That enemy is like, oh crap, I can't get away from you. You are someone I can't ignore. Another example is this level 10 feat in the playtest called Tough Cookie, where if you are below half your hit points, you can, once per day, give yourself 50% of your hit points back, like that. And I'm thinking if there could be ways that just lean into you're just really tough. You can't be brought down. What if the Guardian, for example, had an ability like Orc Ferocity, where when they're brought down to 0 hit points, they're not. They stay on their feet. And I'm wondering, maybe the Guardian can have a badass ability like one of these, but not gated behind the feet. It could be a feature of all Guardians or something chosen through a subclass. Another thing I noticed was unexplored was that toughness for this draft Guardian is basically expressed in your ability to withstand hit points damage and not much else. But we know there's other ways to be tough in Pathfinder. And I bring up one example, this level 2 Barbarian feat. When you're raging, you spend an action to lower your frightened value and be more effective at reducing the sickened value. This draft Guardian does not have much in the way of removing conditions on you. And I want to end with one random point that I didn't know how to fit anywhere else, which is we had a conundrum with the area cover feat. That's the feat that protects your allies against AoE effects. It's a level 4 feat that when you're subjected to an AoE effect and you have allies adjacent to you, they get the benefit of standard cover against the AoE effect, while you have a penalty. And you have no choice in the matter, by the way. If you're adjacent to an ally, you get a penalty, no choice. But this means that to protect yourself from AoE effects, you have to gather around the Guardian. And those of you who are thinking will see the problem. So we had this moment in the third fight where the party was expecting the breath weapon to come. They planted the banner to get a 40-foot radius. They knew that this breath weapon was coming, and they all bunched up around the Guardian. Now, if they didn't have these abilities, I think the usual reaction that most parties would have had at this moment was to just scatter. And that might have been the better play in this situation. A breath weapon needs 2 to 5 rounds to elapse between its use. I don't have a particular fix for this. I think it's a conundrum. How do you find a way for the Guardian to protect allies from AoE effects while grouping them together. Maybe it needs to be stronger. All right, on to some final thoughts. And my first thing I need to say is that despite my long list of critiques, my overall attitude is optimism that they will do right by the Guardian class. That is their track record as Paizo. We can look at the last 15 years. Everything I pointed out is fixable and can be tuned. Again, overall power can relatively be easily tweaked. It's a bit more challenging this time, however. I think they need to get back to the drawing board. But this has happened before in other playtests. There have been more significant changes between playtest and final before. There was a drastic change for the Magus playtest, for example, between the original version of Spell Strike, where you combine a spell and a weapon attack, and the final version. The original version had you make separate attack rolls on the weapon and the spell. And there were specific design reasons they had for that, and they abandoned those in order to get the final product, which was satisfactory to the vast majority of players. And I want to reiterate that the fact that I have this long list of buffs does not mean I think it's an abjectly weak class. These are all alternative suggestions. If all of them were to be adopted, it would be an overpowered class. I was using these examples to illustrate some points I was making. In the end, what satisfies me and everybody might be 2 changes to the class features. And here, during the final thoughts period of this video, I want to make a broader point about thinking about this class. We don't want to simply compare the Guardian's ability to tank to the Champion's ability to tank. We need to look at the entire contribution the Guardian can make to winning a fight and compare that to the entire contribution the other classes make to ending a fight. I'll go back to an example I showed earlier where the Guardian and the Champion were both keeping the Bard up on their feet. One thing I didn't mention before was that if the Bard were knocked down, the Champion would have had the ability to heal the Bard and bring them back up, while the Guardian, at least from their class features, did not have the ability. If a fighter had been on this side of the wall, they would have imposed the ultimate condition of dead on the grappling spirit, which succeeds both at drawing attention from the ghost and killing the enemy. The Guardian as a whole needs to contribute to a party about as much as one of each of these other classes. And the goal here clearly is that we want the Guardian to tank. But a Champion can tank and do more than tank. In the final analysis, tanking is a means to an end, the end being killing or neutralizing your enemies in the vast majority of encounters. The way Swingripper puts it is, okay, you are directing damage to yourself, but what are you doing to tilt the battle towards a victory? And he says that the Guardian is effective at being a meat shield, but it needs to be meat shield plus X. And the Champion is a meat shield, but can also heal allies, provide support, and it has decent offense with full martial accuracy. And starting with the remaster, those who are sanctified to be holy champions, all of their damage will be holy. We've talked enough about the Champion. Let's look at another meat shield, the Barbarian. Before level 5, the Barbarian, compared to other current classes, is the most glass cannony of the martials. They can do frightening damage. However, Raging lowers their armor class by 1. Before level 5, in those first crucial levels, you don't have expert armor proficiency yet. You might have heavy armor, but by taunting a foe, that gives you an effective -2 on your defenses. You're about as vulnerable as the Barbarian, the Raging Barbarian. And you lack the Barbarian's greater hit points and their temporary hit points from Raging. Also, the more significant and difficult fights in people's experience are against higher level boss creatures. That's where giving that accuracy bonus to the target of your taunt can really punish you. Granted, you have the armor specialization ability as a Guardian at level 1, but I've seen critical hits at level 1 do 20-25 damage, and being able to resist 2 of that damage, if it's one of the 3 damage types that your armor might resist, is not going to be significant in most cases. All this while the Barbarian brings frightening damage and not only has something extra that can end the fight, but also is effectively drawing attention, doing your job of tanking by doing that offense. So the Guardian needs that X in addition to being a meat shield. And what should that be? Well, it could be more meat shield. We've talked in this video about being tougher, resisting more damage, shaking off conditions. And this would mean taking on the design challenge I pointed out earlier. How, in this game, can you draw attention to yourself, make foes attack you through purely defensive abilities by eschewing, avoiding increasing your offensive threat? And this is where it's important to remember that this is only one part of tanking. That's the second part of being able to withstand extra attention. The first part is drawing attention in the first place, which I think can be buffed here. Maybe that X could be denying actions to enemies, could be controlling their movement, putting them in places they don't want to be, making it harder for them to leave your reach. Maybe it could be athletics maneuvers to tie them up. Maybe that X could be debuffing enemies more effectively. This is expressed in the Taunt ability in this draft Guardian, which, as I said earlier, has limitations and real risks to using it that I think should be considered. Beyond all that, and despite my long list of criticisms of this draft, it's a draft, I commend Paizo for venturing into new design territory. It's quite clear what they are overall trying to do with this class. They just need to listen to the feedback and tune it appropriately. And the designers know that tanking can be very powerful in a combat game like Pathfinder. Swing Whipper conceptualizes his favorite archetype, the wrestler, as a tank because it succeeds at frustrating the enemy and denying them actions, which forces them to have to deal with you. And part of why he's so critical of the Guardian playtest is because he holds it to such a high standard. My last thought is I have to share how the quest in our playtest ended. The goal of the quest was to right the balance of the universe by nerfing the overpoweredness of wrestling. They eventually had to cast the luchador mask in the Caldera of Mount Remaster. But in the end, wrestling was this martial party's salvation. In the third fight, we had an overly arrogant dragon, yes, that flew in to attack the party, and it was a grapple by the goblin that basically won the fight.
Grab him or I'll kill you after we all die.
Roll. 31.
That's a good roll.
Its fort DC is 31.
That's a success.
Ixaxes! Ixaxes!
The irony, you defeated wrestling by grabbing the dragon.
I learned.
The dragon had its breath weapon back from a critical hit, but it couldn't get the whole party in its breath weapon. It would have needed to fly into a better position to do so, but it needed to spend an action getting out of the grapple. Breath weapon costs 2 actions, by the way, if you are new to Pathfinder Dragons. When the dragon's turn came up, they failed at breaking out of the grapple. Okay, athletics.
And the goblin's athletics DC is
Hopefully
28. DC
It fails!
That's gonna fail.
All right,
Fails.
you squeeze your tail really hard and hold on to this flying dragon as it's trying to fly away from you. It's going to try again with a minus 5. And so they were like, fuck it at that point. They decided to flee. And that ended the fight, which of course led to a shocking ending. You learn to believe in yourselves, the power of friendship, and wrestling.
And wrestling.
Oh no, is the plot twist that you all like look at each other with regret and you decide not to throw the luchador masks into Mount Remaster?
Like the Frodo moment, we stand at the edge and put the mask on.
And we are all restless.
I mean, that would be canon, you guys, because it hasn't been nerfed yet, so...
Yeah, that is true. That is the canon ending. We all
Do
put
it,
on
Dunbar! Cast it into the fire! No!
So, it was an ironic ending for their quest, but it showed the power of a certain kind of tanking in this game. It turned out that the true tanking was the action denial we did along the way. So I hope this long video can enrich the discussion and help the community and the designers figure out how to accomplish what we do want to accomplish with the Guardian class and point the way forward. So that's it. I have been Ronald, the Rules Lawyer. If you haven't yet, I highly recommend looking at my 4E retrospective where I look at the fighter class in that edition, which I think was a successful defender class. You also might be interested in my critiques of the D&D playtest documents that have come out for the next edition of D&D. I'll leave links to these videos in the video description and at the end. Make sure to like this video and to subscribe to my channel and ring the bell. If you haven't yet, support my Patreon. It gives you ad-free early access to most of my videos and exclusive content. Also join my Discord community. We are over 5,000 strong and I participate there a lot. We talk Pathfinder 2e and other gaming. Also, if you want to play Pathfinder 2e, we have a drop-in, drop-out organized play system called Endless Tale Tavern. So that's it. I've been Ronald, the Rules Lawyer. I'll see you next time.